Hello everyone. The last week has been very harrowing because we have been exposed to a horrific murder and also to a very shameful cover-up of that murder by the mainstream media. And it's time to discuss two uncomfortable truths or inconvenient truths. I did a segment 2 days ago with Carl and Firas talking about the murder the establishment is trying to memory hole. And we are talking, of course, about the murder of Iryna Zarutska by the Carlos Brown Jr., a career criminal who was arrested 14 times, and he was given many chances to enter society back. And he repaid them by murdering an innocent girl, an innocent bystander, a 23-year-old Ukrainian war refugee in the United States. This is a murder that the establishment has been trying to erase from the public consciousness. And if it weren't for social media, we would not just not know about it. Very few people would know, but the public at large would be completely ignorant of it. We have new footage comes out. It shows her absolutely terrified. I'm not going to show you more. I think it's particularly bad form. But it's important for us to understand that a very horrific thing happened, a horrific murder took place, and everyone sees it now due to alternative media. And I think that it highlights several issues that we have been talking about here at the Lotus for a long time, and issues that must be addressed. The first issue to say is that this was obviously a horrific crime. It goes without saying. But what else is particularly infuriating is the response of the establishment, of the leftist part of the establishment, if you want me to put it that way, towards that crime. I want to draw the comparison between what happened at the aftermath of George Floyd's death. We had cities burned, widespread looting, civil unrest, mass protest, all sorts of stuff. And we had the establishment kneeling, bending the knee, and engaging in virtue signaling, performative expressions of support to the BLM cause. And it was a cause that back then was insisting that the police should be defunded, that would make people and society more safe. Right. This is how they responded to the murder of Iryna. Zero stories by the mainstream media. Some stories, some articles are being published right now, but they are being published only because of pressure by alternative media. Nothing else. So in some respects, we should say this. This is something that shows the power alternative media hold and can yield. And as we will say in a minute, the President of the United States, Donald Trump, showed pictures of this and discussed this solely because of the pressure alternative media exerts upon the West and upon the US establishment at the moment. So we had zero stories by mainstream outlets such as Associated Press, PBS, New York Times, NPR, Wall Street Journal, the BBC, CNN, WAPO, Reuters, MSNBC, and many more. The first truth we have to address is that evil exists. There are two narratives here. There are many narratives actually circulating around. I'll focus on two. I'll focus on two because I embrace one narrative. I think it's true. And because I consider the other narrative to be posing the greatest threat in our societies right now. The first inconvenient truth is that evil people exist. We are, to a very large extent, responsible for our actions. We're morally responsible for our actions. Now, what does this mean? This means, specifically, that in some cases, some people may have the opportunity to enter society and simply not take advantage of it. It means that some people may harm others intentionally, perhaps contrary to a moral conscience if they do have a moral conscience. And that means that, realistically speaking, there has to be a point where we draw a red line between our attempt to understand some people and excuse their behavior and our resolve to make society better, to make society safer for everyone involved. And I will say this because I've studied philosophy and economics. My PhD was in free will and moral responsibility. And I must tell you that we are faced with the worst of both worlds in the following sense. There are several theories of moral responsibility that say that basically there is none. That if we try to understand behavior, we try to see it as necessitated by factors beyond our control, which implies that people aren't ultimately the author of their own actions. People who have this mentality, they will go to ridiculous extents to excuse the behavior of everyone, especially violent criminals. And they use the case of violent criminals in journals, in articles, in books, because they give them a great case study to put forward their positions, according to which responsibility is denied. But, as I said before, we have to accept the fact, or actually, no, we don't have to accept the fact. We have to realize that we have the worst of both worlds. We have a leftist part of the establishment that blames their enemies and constantly produces excuses, makes excuses for the heinous crimes of groups it considers to be the oppressed under the intersectional calculus. And we see this not just in the US with black and white crime or other forms of crime such as illegal migrant crime on white, and as I will show you also illegal migrant crime on black people. This happens also in Europe. This happens every time, for instance, when in Germany we hear about several asylum seekers or illegal migrants who engage in terrorist acts, and the establishment adopts the following double standard. As I say here, the progressivist, within quotation marks, double standard is any crime committed by members of the oppressed is treated as an isolated incident caused by mental illness. We constantly hear about it, mental illness. As they say, it's an isolated incident. It's not indicative of anything else. Yet, the mere criticism of unfettered multiculturalism, of CRT, and of wokeness are immediately treated as a sign of a far-right extremist epidemic of racism and hate that should be dealt with. That's how the left-wing part of the establishment treats crime. That's how they're talking about crime. Why? Because they want to use every occasion in order to spin the narrative to support their goals. That's particularly shameful. And sometimes they criminalize crime statistics that talk about the groups that they consider to be the oppressed, and many times, in fact almost every time, they're damning. The crimes the left treats as the oppressed in the intersectional calculus are very frequently overrepresented in crime. And sometimes talking about it is branded as hate speech. Other times they allow people to talk about it only in the context of making an argument according to which the only proper response to this is taxing everyone else even more in order to give more money and resources to the groups that are overrepresented in crime, as if all crime were economical. It's not. There are many poor people who don't engage in crime. In fact, I'd say the majority of poor people don't engage in crime. So every time the left is using this argument where it says crime is always a matter of poverty, they are essentially offending the majority of poor people. The majority of poor people don't do this. So it's not just an issue of poverty. Poverty could be a factor that leads to increased chances of violent crime, but it is definitely not the only factor. If that were the case, there would be no rich people who ever committed crime. But there are. Now we have to address the first inconvenient truth and show two conflicting narratives. And I will show you people expressing both narratives. Number one, it's the realistic narrative that is associated with a traditional approach to law and order and the associated and relevant conceptions of justice and punishment. According to the realistic view, there are people who will never, ever, ever be reformed and who will commit crime if they get the chance to do it and if they think they're going to get away with it. These people, realistically speaking, can only be dealt with state coercion and force if they end up committing crime, and the message that they're not going to get away with crime, and the other message, a corollary message, according to which, if they commit crime, they will face severe consequences. The other narrative, the non-realistic narrative, is the leftist one, the, within quotation mark, progressivist one. It's a very utopian narrative. I understand the sentiment, but it's false. It's disastrous. And we shouldn't think that we live in a utopia. According to that utopian narrative, every person responds to goodwill with gratitude. This is absolutely false. The logical conclusion of this narrative is that every time where someone commits crime, it's the failure of society. It's the failure of society to show them enough, sufficient goodwill. That's why they respond to ingratitude. And they're going to set an industry, and DI frequently has presence in that industry, that makes excuses for these people and constantly calls for being soft on crime. Well, I think that this is absolute nonsense. Being soft on violent crime is being tough on victims. It's being tough on innocent people. Trump speaks my language. And he says here, we have to respond with force and strength. We have to be vicious just like they are. It's the only thing they understand. This is also the approach of Sheriff Chad Bianco in California, Riverside, who said during the riots in California that the only way to contain the riots from becoming something bigger and more disruptive is simply to respond with overwhelming force. If you try to play the leftist card and produce excuses for violent criminals, say that society is to be blamed for their heinous crimes, and constantly trying to campaign for lesser sentences, the result of that is that the message is communicated across to violent criminals. If they don't get away with crime, they will at least not face severe consequences. So leftism is empty virtue signaling that makes society worse, in that case as well as in every other. I want to show you now examples of other people who are propagating the other narrative. This is Mamdani in New York, who was saying that defunding the police is a feminist issue. Two questions. Where are Mamdanian democratic socialists now when Iryna was murdered? They're nowhere to be found. If they write an article here or there, it will be an article talking about far-right rage caused by this incident, this murder, and by the alternative media that propagates hate speech. That's what they're going to say. Where are the feminists talking about this? These are some really inconvenient questions. But remember, those who call for defunding the police, they are not on the side of realism. They're on the side of producing excuses for violent criminals and for sending the message across that they aren't going to be met with severe consequences if they get caught for violent crime. And this is there's another philosophical element into it, because the Democrats have lost any sensibility they had when they opened up their door to wokeness and critical race theory. And we have here Ibram X. Kendi, one of the main figures of this movement, critical race theory, who says whiteness prevents white people from connecting to humanity. And he gets a standing ovation. He is one of those people who can't define racism even if he's being asked. And he was rewarded with a position in academia, and he was rewarded with many funds, and he was rewarded with status that he doesn't deserve because he spews nonsense that is corrosive. And he should lose his job. Yes, and he should not be taken seriously anymore, and people should see that critical race theory and its promotion has been nothing but subversive social poisoning. But Kendi and Mamdani are not the only ones. We have here Van Jones producing excuses for DeCarlos Brown Jr. He was saying, the man who stopped Iryna Zarutska was hurting. Hurt people. Well, maybe he was hurting. But I know Iryna Zarutska got murdered. And I know that many other people get murdered by violent criminals. So there comes a time where I have to stop making excuses. We have to stop constantly trying to see axiomatically violent criminals as people who are not responsible for their behavior and people who have been failed by society. And we have to take care of the innocent. We have to choose the innocent over empty virtue signaling. And empty virtue signaling is almost always preferred by people who are shielded, for the most part, by the adverse consequences of their actions and the adverse consequences of the policies that they advocate. But it's not just Van Jones, it's not just Ibram X. Kendi, it's not just Zoran Mamdani. It's also a system of activist judges. It's also a system of people who have been given positions due to DEI considerations and have ended up with positions of power, positions that enable them to adjudicate cases of violent criminals and let them go away. And here, this is the case of Teresa Stokes, the uncertified judge who freed him 14 times. Now, I will say she's not the only one. Activist judges are not people who should occupy the positions that they do occupy, because they care about their activism more than they care about the common good. Their conception of the common good is tied to their activism. But their activism is demonstrably making society worse. And people should not allow this. And she allowed him to go out for the 14th time. We have a graft here by The Rabbit Hole, who circulated it, and says the overwhelming majority of crime is committed by people with more than 3 prior arrests. He committed crime 14 times. They're playing the mental illness card, but I know people who do suffer from mental illness, they're not violent. They don't go around killing people. They don't go around stabbing people in the neck. So this is an offense against people with genuine mental illness. And I'm not having it. Here we have Congressman Randy Fine speaking common sense, speaking my language, expressing my views, and I wholeheartedly agree with him. He says, I'm going to introduce legislation to hold judges accountable when violent repeat offenders they release commit new crimes. It's easy to release criminals when you're protected by an armed bailiff at all times, The rest of us aren't so lucky. Those 12 plus judges that released the Carlos Brown Jr. should have their day in court too. There should definitely be an investigation in the conditions that led these people to do this. Now we have to talk about the other inconvenient truth. And this is a truth that we have to mention, because not mentioning it doesn't help anyone. And we are going to talk about the overrepresentation of Black community in crimes. The reason I say this is because I think this is something that everyone should know, because this indicates some issues that have to be solved, that have to be addressed, that have to be mitigated in order to make society better for everyone, including people of the Black community. We have here people from Fox News sharing stats. Let me just fast forward here and say that there is a vast overrepresentation of the Black community in crime, in violent crime. And here they're talking about interracial violent incidents, violent crime incidents, and they're saying in 2023, Black and white is 385,400 crimes, Black on white, whereas white on Black is 117,900. This is a vast overrepresentation of the Black community in crime. And everyone, including members of the Black community, should be aware of this and should be more interested in solving this than in making empty virtue signaling of a CRT Democrat type that makes society for everyone worse. Right, so I want to talk about this, this man here. His name is Jeffrey Mead, and I want to say really good things. I want to praise him. He starts with a video showing a debate between Liz Wheeler and Nina Turner. Now, Nina Turner is a leftist, basically, who constantly plays the over-sentimentalist card. I will say this. I don't know if I could have a conversation with Nina Turner because she doesn't seem to be open to facts and open to rational arguments. The problem I see when I listen to Nina Turner is the problem that Thomas Sowell is highlighting when he talks about AOC. Thomas Sowell is famous for saying, for instance, about AOC that when you listen to her, you don't listen to her talking about facts. It's just emotional virtue signaling that is manipulating emotion, using abstract terminology that means nothing, using terms like social justice without naming what social justice is, using terms like right, morally wrong, without saying what it is. And here, Liz Wheeler is basically saying that the facts suggest that there are several issues in the Black community that lead to violent crime. Maybe she's right about some of them, maybe she's wrong. But the issue is that the overrepresentation is a fact. So when that thing is a fact, people should acknowledge it, and there should be a debate about it. It's the same issue with other communities, for instance, who are overrepresented in suicide. And the woke intersectional calculus treats them as the oppressed, and many times the debate that should be had, the brainstorm that should be had about making that community less represented in suicide is immediately branded as hate speech by the raging left CRT intersectional woke people. So this is another instance where she reacts incredibly sentimentally, and this is actually what Mead says here. And I want to read his post. He says, "The Black community in America absolutely has a problem with fatherless homes. Millions of Black males are being raised by single mothers who do not have adequate maturity in emotional regulation." So you have millions, not all, of Black women raising boys who do not know how to properly regulate their emotions. These boys then become dangerous to society. Men who do not know how to regulate their emotions are dangerous. The first step in solving the problem is admitting we have one, which we do. Now, I want to say this. I don't think I can speak to Nina Turner, but I can definitely speak to Jeffrey Mead. And I would like to speak to Jeffrey Mead. What he says here is uncontroversial. If you really think about it, it's uncontroversial because it boils down to the idea that family is the prime social unit. Family is the first society. It's the model of society. That's why the model of the family has been used in political philosophy and social philosophy as indicating how society should be run across the board. Right. So he is talking about facts, and what he's talking about, he's saying something that Nina Turner would not be able to stomach, or would pretend to not be unable to stomach, because she would like to virtue signal. What he says is absolutely uncontroversial. Family is the prime social unit, and it functions as the primary social unit of moral formation for the children. So the question is, are we going to start with the facts and trying to brainstorm with the facts and come up with a rational interpretation, a rational understanding of what is going on within a sensible framework of human responsibility and punishment of crime? Or are we going to play the utopian, over-sentimental, emotionally manipulative card that Nina Turner is playing, who is absolutely trying to say, just like the establishment said in the case of Iryna Zarutska, don't talk about it when it's inconvenient for my narrative. That's what Nina Turner is doing here, and this is what Jeffrey Mead isn't doing here. And that's why I respect him, and I will say again, I don't think I can talk to Nina Turner, but I do think I can talk to Jeffrey Mead. And at the end of the day, what we need to remember is that the left has lots of useful idiots. Many useful idiots exist who think in an incredibly utopian fashion, but there are also those who are very calculative, very cynical, very uncaring about all the groups they side with. Why? Because they're playing a divide and conquer game in order to exert political pressure on their enemies. And I will say this very clearly. This makes society worse for everyone, even for people in the Black community. Let me just give you an example. Xavier Di Russo says here, wow, I just learned the story of another beautiful woman murdered by an illegal immigrant and repeat offender. Every Democrat who supported this has blood on their hands. Justice for Dakara Thompson. She was murdered by an illegal migrant. So where are the Democrats now? The answer is the following. The leftists, who are calculative and uncaring and callous and play divide and conquer, who do this only for the means of gaining more and more power, they have absolutely zero care for the groups that they claim to represent. They love posing as these groups' liberators, but if you look at the way they treat them, they're treating them as the perennial victims, and they're creating a mentality of victimhood that creates a psychological servitude, or the sense of lack of liberation in psychology, no matter how liberated one may be in society and in every other case. They are doing this in order to manipulate the people whose support they seek. They're posing as their liberators, they're claiming to selling liberation, but in fact they're selling victimhood. They are making society worse for everyone. And when the groups that they claim to represent clash, they're either going to be silent about it, just like they are silent in these cases, and just like Nina Turner wants to be silent about the issues afflicting the Black community that don't fit their narrative and that falsify her narrative, or they will try to blame it on their political opponents. And they will say that all the clash between the people who belong to their, within quotation marks, oppressed groups, all these incompatibilities are simply caused because of the political opponents. And this functions, especially when we're talking about the Black community and the white community, with the rhetoric of internalized whiteness. So the dilemma is very clear. Are we going to be realistic and make society safer for everyone? Or are we going to virtue signal how over-sentimental we are and make society less safe for everyone? I choose the former. I want society to be safer for everyone.